an issue for some time. And so it'd be just great to make sure the public understands what we're going to be doing. So please give us a quick update in the budget discussion.
Do that.
Mr. President, while you're on that subject, thank you for bringing that up. Just clicked something in my mind. In repairing and replacing those ticket vending machines, if we could take a look at where it seems to be the most infractions, persons with non-validated tickets or what have you, if it's clustering in a specific area, I think the priority should change, and those machines should be fixed first, and then the other machines should be brought online at a later time. I think that would do two things. It would cut down on the issues we're having and seeming to be rising around what's happening with transit police and the discretion, quote unquote, of being able to make a decision whether to give a ticket or exclude with a warning. And if those are happening in one particular area, something needs to happen. So if the machine is constantly down, so we don't get one where we're facing a person is on trying to explain and trying to get to the next stop, then the person gets a ticket, they're treated rudely, what have you. Let's take a look at where the biggest amount is, and if those machines, whether they're breaking down or not, let's put the best machines in those areas and then start working our other way around. I think it will help us in both ways, PR as well as cutting down on not having the validated fares and all of that.
Appreciate that. We'll be happy to make that report. I just know that our replacement policy has been to go to the places where they're used the most heavily first. But frankly, I think you're looking at a slightly different criteria, and so we can look at that. And my hope is that, frankly, even by the time the 22nd rolls around, we're so far down in the replacement cycle that that we're looking at in much broader categories. So appreciate that.
We're talking about the additional budget focus. At the Finance Committee, we talked about also looking at the service enhancement plans that we're developing, beginning to develop now, and the impact that those have on the budget and how we will accommodate those.
Yeah. We will have that as a work program.
Good questions. We look forward to the discussion on the 22nd of the direct date.
And again, if there are other questions that come up between now and then, please feel free to contact either Bill or I, and we'll chase down the answers to make sure it's available for everyone.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, Dave. Let's move on to the fare policy update. Drew Levins and John
Drew and John L. have come up, and as they're moving up, just a very quick introduction, which is again, one of the work program items from last budget season was a review of the fare policy. We started this with the board and answered questions. We've come back with another review of that, and Drew will be leading that discussion, but also augmented by the current status of the Transit Access Fare Program that Janelle will report on the current status of that. So, perhaps with that, Drew.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to give you this update. What I believe you have in front of you is a draft fare policy that the Fare Policy Committee that was formed by the General Manager this past fall has been working on for the last several months. This is a result of several committee meetings with multi-functional disciplines in the agency. As well as a little over a dozen visits with community leaders, particularly in diverse communities, and also a review by the Budget Task Force. So just to be clear, this document is we're not asking for a decision today, but we want to get your feedback on this and let you know that this policy is intended, as Neil indicated, to inform and guide fair practices going forward, and that it really is intended to be the filter so that we have a foundation for decisions we make going forward. And the key elements of this policy are the three objectives that we identified, and those would be First and foremost, financial, and the criteria that we've outlined is that we would strive to have a fare box recovery of 30%. And fare box recovery is defined as taking passenger revenue divided by system costs. And system costs are made up of all of the operations costs, as well as all of the general and administrative costs that represent, that are costs shared across all modes. So HR, public affairs, finance, all of those major categories. That's what gets us to fare box recovery. In 2011, according to the National Transit Database, the average fare box recovery for the industry was 24%. TriMet was at 27%. In 2012, we were at 28%. This year, year-to-date, we're at 29%. So we think 30% is a good objective. And again, we see this as a dynamic document because obviously that could change over time. But that would be one criteria. A second criteria is what we're calling, or objective is what we're calling customer experience. And the idea there is that we just simply strive to find a balance between service quality and service efficiency so that we're making it convenient and easy to use for our customers. And we want to make sure that we're mindful of that experience as we look at new technologies and opportunities to improve efficiencies on the operations side. And then thirdly, importantly, we have equity as a key objective, and the essential, I think, criteria there is that we would have programmatic mitigation for impacts on low-income and transit-dependent riders. And I believe John now momentarily will share some information with regard to that. And then, of course, as part of this policy, we have a set of guidelines which, again, reinforce those key objectives that I just mentioned. On page 2 and 3 of this document that you have, you'll see what we're calling TriMet fare examples. And this really is the import of our visit this morning, to get feedback from you with regard to a set of key fare elements that are in the left-hand column, and then what our current practice is and what our peer agencies are currently doing. So you have a sense of what the landscape looks like now as we consider fare practices going forward that are guided by this framework. So if I may, I'll just kind of go down the list. Honored Citizen is one of the key fare elements for us. And as you may know, our Honored Citizen fare is currently $1 compared to our adult single ticket ride of $2.50. The FTA allows the Honored Citizen to be up to half of the single ticket fare price. So we have that opportunity. As you can see in the right column, with regard to our peers, half of those are priced at or above, and the others are priced below. So the peer group average is 45%. Honored Citizen would be priced at 45% of the single ticket, whereas TriMet is at 40%. So compared to our peers, we're slightly below. I might also mention that of the peer group that we looked at, which, by the way, we've indicated that peer group in a document that's also part of your packet called How We Stack Up. So you can see who's represented in that group. But 12 of the 19 price their Honored Citizen and Youth Passes at the same level, and they call it a reduced fare. For various reasons, including simplifying the fare structure and the number of fare instruments. So that's another element to be aware of as we go forward.
Drew, I have a question.
Yes.
Something I didn't understand. So the FTA actually has a limit on the
Yes.
Honored Citizen, and did they define Honored Citizen or the same way we do in terms of the age?
Yes. Tom,
Yeah, we do.
yes.
Interesting. Okay. So we can only charge, the maximum we can charge is half of the normal.
tickets, adult.
Okay. I didn't realize that.
Just to clarify, just this is probably more detail than you want, but my understanding is that's true except for peak. During peaks, you can charge the regular fare.
That is correct as well.
Oh, okay.
Obviously, that's a complication we haven't really
Yes.
looked at.
Right. And most agencies haven't taken that approach generally. That's another layer of complexity.
That's one of our toward ones. I'm sorry, getting some abuse over here. You're saying something about my age.
With regard to lift fare, which is another key fare element, as you might know, TriMet currently charges $2.45 for the single ticket ride versus our adult fare. So we're at 98% of that single ticket adult fare. The FTA does allow up to 2 times that amount. Our peer average is 153% of their base single ticket fare compared to our 98% of our base. So there, as you may also recall, we are ratcheting up the lift fare to be equal to our single ticket adult ride. Next, paid parking. As you may know, we don't currently charge for our parking at our 33 park and ride lots, with the exception of 20 spaces at combined spaces at our Gateway and Sunset park and ride garages, in which case we charge 50 cents an hour and generate about $6,000 a year in revenue. As you can see, some of our peer agencies do charge for parking, and those rates vary, as you can see in the right column. Young Park provided, I believe, a study in January of 2012 that indicated that were we to charge for parking, the parking management costs would be in the neighborhood of $150,000 to $250,000, and the revenue generated would be in the neighborhood of $500,000 to $750,000 at $1 a day, and the rate goes up to something like $1,250,000 at $2. I believe his qualifier in that report, at least, was, that might be more than the market can bear, but to be, I guess, continued. But
So I just have a question. So we only have 59% occupancy of the total opportunity to park?
at this point in time, and of course that's not a balanced number. At Sunset, you better get there pretty early
Sure.
to get a spot. But yes, on average.
But I was just thinking then if we do go to charging, does it make sense to have only 59% occupancy? So what would be the steps to make sure that people, use those parking slots? It's just a comment.
That's a great.
As opposed to parking in the neighborhoods or.
Correct.
Yeah, right.
So there's an interesting experiment going on, I guess, that may help us in this. Isn't the city of Portland soon going to be establishing paid parking at the zoo and at the areas around
There's an article in the report
Yes.
today about
Is there a-
controversy over that.
There's a
Yeah.
controversy, but again, if that's correct, there'll be some real-time understanding of what that may do for some parking.
Right. And, so this is always one of those balance between wanting to get more people in the system versus
Yes.
the charge. And again, we do have capacity in the lots, so one of the things we've often looked about is could you use charges to help balance that capacity more? So charge it, those that are oversubscribed, knowing that there is capacity that could perhaps be not charged nearby. So one of the factors we've seen, we can get into this a lot more, is that when we do our license plate surveys and lot maps, we find a lot of people drive to the park and ride lot, not closest to their home, but closest to their destination. And so then it may be that there's some pricing strategy that tries to get more transactions.
It is interesting because you're right. The Washington Park venues have formed a Transportation Management Association, and based on analysis of other zoo properties around the country, they've determined that there is an opportunity to increase or to charge for parking. And their primary objective is to encourage people to use other modes.
Yes.
Primarily transit.
Yes.
And so, which is slightly different than our park and ride, which is we want people to get there to encourage people in the outlying areas to rely on transit to get in to town. So it's interesting. Express service is another of the key elements, and what we wanted to share with you here is currently there is no price differential at TriMet with regard to fare levels for express service. We currently have two bus routes that are defined as express service, and in fact, in our literature, we attach the word express as attribution on those, and that's the line 92 and 99. There are about, and to be clear, those are lines that don't have any local service. They're pure express. There are about 6 other lines in the system, I think Neil may have alluded earlier, that have just a bit of local service. A good example is a 96 out of Tualatin, where it makes a few stops and then it gets on the freeway and brings people downtown. So in practice, we probably have more like 7 or 8 express lines, but there is no price differential. Of our peers, as you can see, our peer agencies, a little more than half do in fact include a premium fare for their express service. And as you can see the pricing there, and typically, Tom, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it represents service that might be a bit longer in.
Yeah, trips are generally longer, right?
But that's again an opportunity. So, and then 2 additional elements: event service. We just wanted to make you aware that, as you again may already know, we don't currently have a price differential for event service, although we spend upwards to $1 million a year in providing extra service to events around the region. And some of those are pretty obvious, like Blazers and Timbers and Rose Festival and Race for the Cure and the like. We've noted that many of our peer agencies provide a day pass for special events. By the way, TriMet effectively does that as well. When we have our ride guides and customer service representatives out at events, we encourage people to buy the day pass so that, because the events typically last longer than 2 hours, so we effectively are promoting day passes as well. Wes, again, 5 of the 15 agencies in the peer group have commuter rail service, and they all charge a premium service, and it varies based on the time of day and the length of the service. Currently, again, we don't have a price differential for this, and to consider a premium fare for West, we'll have to revisit the IGA when it comes up again with Washington County in 2015. But that's an opportunity. And the question with regard to West is, while the vehicle certainly may be represented as premium, the question becomes, is the service? And that's something, for further discussion in terms of where it goes, how it operates, how it integrates with the rest of the system. The TriMet's position to date has been that it's part of a seamless integrated transit system, and therefore it's the same price as everything else. And finally, we just wanted to give you some fodder, if you will, for thinking about electronic fare going forward. And I imagine, Neil, that Chris Tucker will have an opportunity to provide more in-depth information. But in the meantime, our intent is that we currently, with Chris's leadership, we have several committees that are looking at electronic fare in terms of outreach, in terms of how we manage the customer service side of it, in terms of impacts on low-income riders, how TVMs play into the mix, retail distribution and the like. And so there are a number of considerations as we go forward with an electronic fare system that we'll want to look at, including how broad is the retail distribution, what do the fare instruments look like going forward with that distribution, how are TVMs used, is there a transaction fee for TVMs to encourage people to use other forms or other channels to get their fares, how do we handle transfers, number of questions that folks are looking into right now. So that's what we have in mind. And again, you have a how we stack up document in front of you that kind of just shows you where we line up versus our peers. One thing I did want to, I guess, end with is that when you look at the how we stack up list of TriMet versus our peers, you'll see how we stack up with our single ticket ride, our day pass, who has premium fares, what the monthly price looks like, the annual price. What we haven't put together yet is the average fare for each agency. And that we think is a key number for us to really understand, because it sort of gets us to the net of all these different programs across different agencies. And while we might be higher or lower in some particular areas, what each agency is bringing in as an average fare is a fairly important indicator, along with fare box recovery. So that'll be forthcoming, and we just don't have that data at this point.
Questions?
I just think in the future, when we just need to have a real robust conversation on this, for what that looks like for TriMet in terms of fare increases over time.
Mr. Stovall?
Well, thank you. I've got a couple of questions. Going back to the TriMet fare policy, and the number one financial strive for fixed route fare box recovery goal of 30% of operating expenses. Why are we at 30%, or why would we project 30% when nationally you mentioned it was at 24%, and historically we've been lower than that?
Well, Dave can probably help me out here, but over the last 10 years, our fare box recovery has gone from, I believe, a number like 23% and pretty much fairly equal increments up to the point where we're at today. The National Transit Database number of 27% for us and 24% for the average was back in 2011. We'll get updated numbers this summer, so we'll have a better idea where everybody else is at this point. But 30% is, based on our history, looks like a reasonable incremental increase as a goal, given that we're 29% year to date this year.
If I might add, and this is, I think actually it's a place where we should drill down more, because there's a lot of moving parts that go into that number. So for example, if you look at a line like our line 14, for example, in Hawthorne, which, as we, in our terminology, is very productive, there's a lot of ons and offs, a lot of people are using the line, that will have a higher fare box recovery than a line such as one of the suburban lines out in the 36th service points of Lucasville, for example. So part of fare box recovery is a service design question as well as a financial question. So what that policy is tended to do is to make sure that we have a high level, that we are aiming our productivity in the right place, as well as the fare box in the right place. So there's a lot of moving pieces that contribute to that number overall. And I think I've been fair. Certainly our fare has gone up, but the other thing that we've seen over the last 5 years is that we have reduced some of the least productive services. Some of the Happy Valley, one of the Happy Valley routes is very unproductive, and others, in order to focus on more productive service where we're serving more people as a result of the economic downturn. So again, just a lot of moving pieces to consider in that number.
So on the surface, as one would hear, at 30%, fare box recovery, you instantly move towards, I think for the average person, you instantly move towards, the cost of fares going up. I mean, because if the national average is 24% and we're targeting 30%, you would think that, well, fare box recovery, the major portion of that is fares and the cost of fares. The other components of those, of fare box recovery could just be more efficiency, more ridership. I mean, if we have a fixed, if we have a fixed cost and we're not adding to the line to take care of additional ridership, then we actually will enhance our revenue and not enhance our cost. So essentially, I mean, just as you hear that, I think there can be more definition to that perspective to say that this is not just raising fares. This is more. This is a better, a more efficient way of approaching our system, in that we're utilizing the fixed cost better by doing some of what you said in regards to making sure the lines that we do have out in the community are better utilized, because that allows us to cover more fixed costs, and then also there is the fare component of that. But if you hear just based on a perspective like that, you think, well, we're just going to raise our fares to a higher average than the norm across the country, and that's what's going to get us there. But I think some additional clarification for folks looking on to say it's not just fares. It's in a sense just a better, more efficiently run system allows us to get higher fare box recovery. The other thing, I like to see this information in regards to how we stack up, and the challenge that we have here is that folks will look at, folks could look at this and say, well, Houston is at $1.25 for the base, and this is very complex because you've got base fares, you got express fares, you got daily fares, you've got all these things that impact the actual quote-unquote fares that get paid in a day or a month or annually. The tricky part here is the cost of living. That's not necessarily reflected here. I mean, because to live in Houston is much less costly than it takes to live in Portland, and sadly enough, I saw a web page last night that highlighted the top 10 worst places to retire. Portland was the worst place to retire. What? And I'm just telling you what the article said. They basically highlighted one thing. It's two things, but primarily it was the cost of living for folks who are on fixed incomes as they retire. Cost of living is pretty high in the city of Portland, which really pushes up the cost for retirees.
That's not Gresham, right?
That's not Gresham. Gresham's utopia. Yeah, we're trying to find ways to actually get rid of the state income tax. So just in Gresham, it's like a tax-free zone. But the other thing is that Oregon has a state income tax. Was the two things that you cobbled together. And so as we look at this information, and I get this sometimes, folks will compare us to other regions and other places and claim that our costs are significantly out of line when the cost of living isn't necessarily reflected here. But you put all this stuff together, and there still is concern to make sure that as a region, we take the cost, take the price elasticity and elasticity of demand into effect as we look to balance out what we're trying to do here. But this is again great information. It'd just be interesting if there's a way that, for board deliberation and conversation, if there was a way that we can actually incorporate some type of kind of the cost of living, perspective in some of this information.
Good. We have that information, and we can provide that to you, so to give more context to all of this.
And I guess my comments, first off, your comments are right on in terms of the kind of what's in the fare box recovery math, and I think efficiencies and some of the electronic stuff we're doing is going to be very, very helpful in terms of allowing us to do things that maybe we never have done before. I look at this as I look at the fare box recovery on our fare issues. That's really the only thing we have under our own control to deal with how to provide. What I think the region is expecting is another 2.8, is that the number I heard, % increase in service a year to be able to hit our targets and actually make our land use and transportation system work here in the region. So we got a daunting task, and I know that many of the other folks that are on this list, I'll lay money, if you look at their operating budgets, major portions of it are made up from sales tax. And we do not have that component at all. And without that, we're cobbled and hobbled somewhat by the way we put our fares together. So I think we need to, this is just a robust and rich conversation that we're going to have in terms of how you look at fares and what the goal is for fares, and again, what we think we can do to help meet the expectations of the public out there. And I don't have easy answers, but I know that our situation is a whole lot more restrictive than other states and other major cities throughout the United States. And I don't know whether it's something you could pull together. When I look at some of these major cities, if you could actually bring us kind of the mix of their revenue sources, I think that would be very instructive for us to just understand why we're different in many ways than the rest of the
Thank you for that. We also have that data that will make available as well too. And if I may just quickly, with regard to the fare box recovery, it might be worthwhile to know that 65% of the system cost as part of that equation come from labor. So that's again, that's a controllable expense. And I would also add that under the guidelines, well,
like really?
But I also would say that under the guidelines on that fare policy document, we included under the financial section that the intent of whatever financial approach we take, it would encourage ridership. So.
Janelle.
Great. Quickly, Director Stovall, you mentioned Portland being the worst place to retire, but maybe to make up for that, today CNN announced we're the best place for beer. So maybe I'm reading the wrong list. I'm not sure about that.
I like your list better.
Well, good morning, President Warner, members of the board. For the record, my name is John O'Bell, the Director of Diversity and Transit Equity, and it is my pleasure to give you a quick update on the Access Transit program, which is formerly known as the Low-Income Mitigation Program. As a recap, the board allocated $1.3 million last June to establish a mitigation program to help those most impacted by the fare increase. Following this action, to help us quickly develop a program, we held a roundtable discussion with a number of nonprofit leaders from across the region in July to kind of explore a number of mitigation options. The group recommended TriMet explore three critical areas. The first being to expand the already existing 5% agency commission program to include nonprofit organizations serving low-income populations, many of whom we've learned throughout the course of this process were purchasing their fares at a local Fred Meyer's, Safeway, or another retail outlet. Additionally, they asked that we increase the discount from 5% to 20%. Second recommendation was to create a small grants program to help nonprofits and community-based organizations meet the growing transit needs of their clients, needs the organizations told us they could ill afford due to shrinking budgets. And lastly, to set aside a portion of the board allocation and leverage these funds with local and national foundations to provide ongoing resources for the small grants program. We candidly liked all of the recommendations, and in September, we kicked off the first phase of implementation with a fare assistance program, which is now offering 20% discounts to over 45 nonprofit organizations. You have a handout inside your packet that lists those organizations. In March, in partnership with Ride Connection, we kicked off phase 2 with the Fare Relief mini grant program, awarding over 20 nonprofits and community-based organizations fare awards to serve the growing and ever-demanding needs of our diverse community. But candidly speaking, our successes have not come without some observations in areas we need to strengthen, we need to continue to tune. When deciding how to apportion the resources the board allocated, we had three goals in mind. The first was to be conservative in our projections and in our assumptions. We did not know the number of nonprofit organizations who would sign up for the program Therefore, we did not want to under budget and later have to limit the ability to serve the organizations in need. Secondly, we wanted to develop a meaningful and targeted program with accountability and controls, helping individuals most in need. And thirdly, we wanted to be innovative and creative in designing the program elements, exploring new ways of offering this type of a program. To that end, we budgeted $684,000 for the Fair Assistance Program, anticipating an increase in sales and leveraging opportunities with government partners. Some were more successful than others. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. But to date, we've seen an increase, we've seen a 25% increase year over year in agency sales and an approximate $180,000 cost impact, or 26% of the allocated budget for the Fair Assistance Program. Bottom line, what this means to the individual riders is we have been able to serve more than 26,000 individuals since September 1st, and we have assisted with over 36,000 actual fare instruments, either tickets or fares. Similarly, we budgeted $616,000 for the Fare Relief Program. Approximately $312,000 has been expended, with another $50,000 allocated to, frankly, target grant opportunities in Clackamas and Washington counties. When the committee met, which was made up of 3 representatives from TriMet and 3 representatives of Ride Connection, when the committee met, one of the things we noticed of a sort of a glaring area of omission was not enough applications from Clackamas and Washington counties. So the committee decided to allocate a portion of the grants so that we can have more target outreach, really helping to meet the regional needs. Lastly, we've held a number of conversations with local foundations to garner interest in the Leverage Fund and are still in discussions. When I chat about the lessons learned, I'll alert you of kind of what that has resulted in. Switching to slide 4, a quick overview of how fares have been used. 80% have been used to serve adults as defined by ages 20 and older. 10% for teens as defined by ages 13 to 19, and 1% to serve children as defined ages 0 to 12. Fare types used, 87% were for tickets and 12% for passes. Additionally, the top 3 uses of fares were: number 1, 46% for employment, job training, and education attainment; number 2, 11% for homeless youth services, both outside in as well as new avenues for youth are members of our participants in our program, and 8% for medical appointments and services. So really kind of a snapshot of what our riders, our transit-dependent riders, or most low-income riders, are utilizing these fares for. Along the way, we have discovered a number of effective practices. The first being proactively working with nonprofit organizations, and the program design really did help to get us up to speed and kick off. We kicked off September 1st, board allocated funding in June. We quickly met with nonprofit organizations, and we were ready September 1st when the new fare increase occurred. Holding trainings with interested organizations was also a very effective practice. A number of questions in terms of how do we order fares, who do we contact to order fares. Jointly with our sales team, we held a series of conversations with our nonprofit organizations, and that was a proven practice. So consequently, the result of this is not only is this a great program here locally, but this program has quickly become a model in the country. In the past few months, we've held conversations with a number of transit agencies who are looking to replicate TriMet's programs, both here locally in the Pacific Northwest, but also a few agencies on the East Coast. But there are areas, frankly, where we continue to look for ways to improve the program. And some of the things that we've learned are, first, The recession impacted many organizations' ability to purchase fares. Though many organizations signed up initially for the program, they didn't always have the capital to purchase fares from TriMet at 20% or at 60%. In attempting to garner interest with foundations, we learn an important lesson and an important observation, and I frankly think an important regional discussion that we're also having, which is transit is a low priority in terms of a low priority amongst our philanthropic community, and often is a misunderstood priority and area of need by the philanthropic community. We held a number of conversations with local foundations, and quite frankly, one of them stated to us, hadn't considered transit. And of course, our response was, well, you're paying for it in one way, shape, or form. It might make sense for us to think creatively, partner ways. So those conversations are starting. But for many of our foundations, transit in many ways is seen as a public utility. It's not something that is thought about until the client, frankly, doesn't have the access to it. Then they cannot achieve education attainment, employment attainment, et cetera, et cetera. So in closing, I'd like to read a quote by Ergo, who recently received a grant from TriMet, which reads, TriMet's extremely generous grant of tickets will profoundly benefit 4 distinct groups of Ergo clientele, including Ergo's established employment services program, refugee and immigrant family strengthening program, African women's refugee literacy program, and the senior program, end quote. Your leadership in establishing this program has and continues to help many in our community, and with that, I'll take any of your questions. Thank you.
I would just like to make a comment. It's incredible to think that it's been almost a year, but I'd just like to acknowledge you for your leadership around this. And I was able to attend at least one of the sessions, and people were very engaged. So I applaud you for rolling this out.
So the overall reaction's been positive?
Yes, President Warner, the overall reaction, I think, has both been positive, but also I think the general manager can attest to this, as we've held general managers' coffees across the region. It's also prompted a number of agencies to engage with TriMet in ways that they frankly did not in the past.
Yes,
A couple of comments. I want to first thank Director Saragosa for encouraging us to do this last year. So, because ultimately, the idea of poverty and prosperity, when we hear that 46% of the tickets and passes are utilized for work, if I remember this correctly, work, education, and training, so on and so forth. I mean, that's really, really positive when you think about that upward mobility and the access to jobs and training and education is, that's tremendous of what we're focused on. So that's certainly something that's very, very encouraging. And I want to second the thanks for John L. I know I've sent him a couple of names over time and sometimes harassed him, stalked him at some point.
It's always appreciated, Director Stovall.
He goes to Starbucks and there I am. So, but I want to thank him for his leadership in this effort, because it's not easy to get all these groups on the same page and get results like this to where we're certainly being effective and in the areas that I think we need to be targeting programs such as this, so that we continue to raise the ability of folks to move from poverty and prosperity in our community. So thank you, and thank you for encouraging us to get this done.
So where do you think we're going to end the year budget-wise with utilization?
In terms of fiscal impact, that's a good question. I think somewhere in the middle.
Okay. Again, remind me, we have the same dollar amount
In the
budget for next year.
10 million.
Yeah. All right, so we've got some ability to still grow with that amount there. Good. Good. Thank you. No other questions? That's all we have on the agenda. Is there anything else from staff? Great. Thank you. Very informative session. Appreciate it.
Have somebody